Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about web APIs and explaining what an API is and how it can be used in single-page applications. So single-page applications are usually applications that are divided strictly into front-end and back-end, or rather the client side and the server side. So the client side would usually be developed with technologies such as Angular, React, Vue, and most commonly known JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. So these technologies are what the client sees. So all the rendering is done on the client side. All the templates, everything which the user sees is being done on the front end, on the client's computer. The server, which is developed by .NET, Python for instance, or C#, only is responsible for sending the data to the client. That's it. There is no rendering done on the server side. It's only being asked for data and it returns data. So basically that's how it works. We have the server side, which is the server somewhere, for example in Amazon server rooms, and we have the client, which is the client's computer, which communicates with our server. And the server most commonly sends back data in the JSON format. So it's basically just the raw data in a, we could say, an object which is similar to a JavaScript object. It sends the data that the user requests. So such a request, for instance, can look like this. We have the DevTools here, and this is the first request that I made here to the website on it. And as we can see here, what we got as the response is the website itself. Now that might be a bit weird, because I said that the server sends only the raw data back to the client. Well, the first request, usually the response to that request is the website. So the first request to the server makes the server send back the whole application. It's usually a minified code of the application that the computer starts to understand and renders a sort of a template for us to fill in with data. So as we can see here, the first request to Onnet returned us this working template of a website with a loader, as we can see here. But this is the first request. All of the other requests will look like this. So I have created a very short API documentation here. This is made in the REST way of doing the API endpoints. So firstly, what are the API endpoints? Well, as the client browses through the application, and let's say that he goes to the main website, he wants to do things connected to the posts. Maybe he wants to create a post. Then he would use basically he would call the website.com, and after the slash he would add posts here, this little endpoint, we could say, and that would create a new post. He would also send some data in the JSON format to the website and to this endpoint. If he would like to get all the posts, he would send a GET request to posts/1, for example, if he wanted to get a specific post, or maybe just all the posts, right? So this is basically how we do requests. We only have these endpoints that we use, and we communicate with the server only based on data, because all of the rendering is done on the client side. So that is the API. Basically, it's a resource management system where we have these endpoints and we use them to get what we want to either save, delete, maybe edit. These, of course, are ways of doing the request. So we have request type get, request type post. Here, for instance, I send the request to the Onnet again here, and we can see how it looks on the DevTools in Chrome. So we have request URL, request method, status code, and other headers that we could have, we can choose which method we want to use. For instance, post is most usually used when we want to send over data from the client to the server. We take our own data, like we decide to create a post, for example, and we have the post content, we have the post title, let's say, and we send these two pieces of information over to our server, basically, or some server, of course. And we say, okay, the request method is going to be post in order to send this data. If we want to get some data accordingly, we will use the request method, which has the get name, let's say, right? The second thing is the status code. If everything was done all right, then the status code will be 200, which stands for OK. There are a lot of these status codes. One of them you might already know. It's 404, which means resource was not found. There is also 403, which stands for forbidden access, so you do not have access to a certain resource. For example, if you're not authenticated and you're trying to access some data from Facebook but you're not logged in, you are most likely going to get a 403 response. There are also some headers that we have here. For example, we can see the content type here, which is application JSON. It tells us basically that the information returned from the server is going to be in the JSON format. Here we have two very important things. So this is the general description of a request. We have the general information and the headers of a request. And here we have the request body and the response that we get from the server. The request body can be used for post and put methods, for instance, where we want to send some data over to the server. Post is, for instance, creating a resource, for example, creating a new image, or maybe writing a new message. We want to send over some data, but there is also the put method, in which we want to edit a resource. Then we also want to give some information with which we will edit that resource. So basically, this is the request body. We are sending, in this instance, some client ID and paid content information, which is false. The response we get is in, as we can see here, we have application JSON, and indeed we get a JSON back. Of course, this is the preview. In this tab, the response, I would get the raw JSON data, but this is the DevTools in Chrome make it so that it looks quite neat here. So here we get some config information, some mode, and some user data back from the server. So this is basically how all of the information with the request looks like. You can even now you can open up your own DevTools by pressing F12 on your keyboard and going to the network tab, and you'll see the same thing here. Every single one of the requests will have some status code. Usually it's going to be 200, which is all okay. Now, with regards to the headers, we send some additional information with the headers. For instance, if we want to send some authorization key, we can attach it to the headers. If we want to give to the server some information about the content type or the data type which we are going to be sending over, is it going to be a data stream or maybe JSON that we are going to be sending? Well, it's all in the headers. So the server is going to take these headers and act appropriately on them. There are a few types of APIs. There is the REST API, which I have shown to you earlier. We also have the SOAP and the RPC architecture. So in the next video, I'm going to be talking about the REST API and creating the REST API in JavaScript using the Express framework for JavaScript. Now, let's send over some requests to some APIs that I know exists on the web. So I have my Visual Studio Code here opened up, and I have a code solution where I can send requests directly instead of using the browser. So the first API endpoint I'd like to contact is JSON placeholder. So basically, this is a website which is usually used by developers to fill their own applications with data, and they have a ready API already made to serve their needs. Here we're just going to access JSON placeholder typicode.com website, and the endpoint we're going to access is to-dos. So the request, let's say type that we're doing is get request. So it means that we are going to request all of the to-dos the website has. So let's send the request over. And as we can see, we get a response. The status code is OK. We get also some headers here, some information. So we can see here that each one of these to-dos that were returned look like a JavaScript object, and the only difference is that the parameters of the object are wrapped in quotation marks here. But the information is quite easy to see here. We are just sending a request and receiving raw data back. So this is the request to JSON placeholder. I also have a post request. So what this will do is this will send a post request to JSON placeholder and to posts. So the endpoint will be post. So basically we are creating a post here. Let's see. And indeed, as we can see here, it says that we have successfully created a post. And we even get back the ID of the post. So I suppose that we just sent over some raw data, and with the post request, of course, I didn't give this request any sort of data, but the JSON placeholder is configured in such a way that it gives us back a mock response, which says that we have created a new post. Okay, so the last request that I'd like to make is to the NASA website. So NASA has their own API, and we can actually send requests to it and get some data. So let's try to do that. So we can see that we received a different type of response. We received forbidden. So we can actually look at the error that we have here, and it says that the API key is missing. So get one at API NASA.gov, and I think we'll go there. So what we can see here, we can generate an API key for ourselves. So this situation usually happens when, if you want to get access to resources, you will need to have some sort of authentication. So here we just send requests and we got the data as planned. But here this resource is guarded, so we need an API key. So let's actually get one. And here we are. We have the API key just like that. So let's copy this. Okay, let's remove the URL and just have get here. So what we can see here is that we are sending the request, the API key with the request parameters. So here, this question mark signifies that we actually are sending a parameter over. The parameter name is API key, and we have a generated API key. So let's see what the response will be. And here we are. We get the OK 200 response, which is very positive. We can see that the API key is working, and we get some data. So some explanation, some date, and some images even. Let's look at the images. Here we can see a beautiful cloud, cosmic cloud. So yeah, this is basically how APIs work. We send over some data, we have some information that we can send to the server, maybe some authorization, we get data back as a response. So thank you for watching this video. In the next tutorial, I'm going to be creating a RESTful API in Express, in JavaScript, in Node. So thank you all for watching, and see you in the next video.